Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. I'm Professor Emily Lawson, or Auntie Emily. This is Asian Pacific Islander American Studies, American Culture 353, History 454, Asians in American Film and Television course at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And since we are still in a pandemic, we've been meeting virtually all year. Thank you all for joining us today for a special conversation with Filipino American adoptee and independent filmmaker James Beni Wilson. We were just watching the trailers or short cuts from the documentaries that James produced. One is called BINITAY, and the other is Once Upon an Ochia. And you can find those on the YouTube page, on YouTube channel on BINITAY. Lisa, can you stop sharing that screen, please? And then, yeah, thank you. All right. If you're just joining us, please type your name in the chat and where you're from or what indigenous land you're logging in from. If you're an adoptee or a Filipino American or Pinoy, Pinay, or from Cebu or from Novi, Michigan, where James is from, or from my hometown of Seattle, Washington, we want to know that too. You could use the chat for comments and reactions. Since we cannot see you during this webinar, we welcome and rely on your comments in the chat to keep the energy flowing here. Please use the Q&A box to ask a question so it doesn't get lost in the scroll of comments. And if you're a student enrolled in this class and you want to appear on screen or audio to ask your question, please note that when you type your question in the Q&A box too. I want to thank our sponsors, the Asian Pacific Islander American Studies Program, the Department of American Culture, especially our events coordinator who's behind the scenes making all of this happen, Lisa Toon, who made the flyers, set up webinars, and is making all of the videos and everything happen today. Thank you, Lisa. And shout out to the United Asian American Organizations, UAO, and FASA, the Filipino American Students Association, for always helping to spread the word. I'm really blessed to be able to introduce to you one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. I consider him as one of my adopted children myself, as one of my mentees and former student at Paaralang Pilipino, where he now teaches. I've known him for many years now. I don't even want to count because that will probably reveal my age. Definitely will reveal his. But if you want to look at his website, if you haven't already, the film's website is BINITAY-documentary.com. Somebody throw that in the chat for me, please. But James Beni Wilson is a documentary filmmaker from Metro Detroit. His film BINITAY, Journey of a Filipino Adoptee, tells the story of his journey as a Filipino adoptee in search of his birth story and birth family. You can see the flyer here for it above me. His film has been shown at Harvard, Schoolcraft Community College, Minnesota Transracial Film Festival, Filipino American Community Center of Michigan, and the Filipino Heritage Camp at Heritage Camps for Adoptive Families. His sequel documentary, Once Upon an Ochia, you saw the trailer for, or the short cut from, and his newest one, Sa Pag-uli, I'm not saying that, Sa Pag-uli ni Isagani, When Isagani Comes Home, highlights the post-reunion relationship, sociocultural challenges, and collective narratives of his biological family. James was born in the village of Mábuli in Tabógon on the island of Cebu in the Philippines. He was transracially adopted at the age of 3 years old. He received his Bachelor of Science in Sociology at Arizona State University. He is a board member and youth chair liaison of the Filipino American Community Council of Michigan, or FILAMCCO. He also serves as a board member of the Filipino American Community Center of Michigan, PACCM. He's secretary of our Michigan chapter of the Filipino American National Historical Society. and he was a past assistant director of Paaralang Pilipino Language and Cultural School at PACCM, where he's also the lead facilitator and teacher for Filipino Youth Initiative. That's actually how we met. He came in. He'll tell you the story, but he graduated and became a teacher and director, and we are so proud of him for continuing that class. James also serves as a board member for American Citizens for Justice, ACJ. Many of you watched the film Who Killed Vincent Chin. ACJ formed after the murder of Vincent Chin back in 1982. In 2013, James was awarded the Rising Star Award by Asian Pacific Islander American Vote Michigan for his dedication and leadership in the APIA community. He utilizes his blog space, Pathos of Asian Adoptees, as a space for dialogue between Asian adoptees, adoptive parents, and larger communities. Pathos of Asian Adoptees serves as a hub for shared information about Asian adoption studies, culture, socio-historical, and sociocultural context. Please give a warm welcome to James Beni Wilson.
Hello, how are you all?
Yay, thanks for joining us, James. You're going to give a presentation and then we'll open up for Q&A. Lisa's going to share your slides. You want her to start sharing them now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, interesting. All right. So this is my presentation. It's called An Adoptee Story, Identity and Connection. So that's pretty straightforward.
I'm sorry, James. Do you see it in presentation view?
Yes.
Okay, I had that problem too. So that's why I asked Lisa to share it. Lisa, are we able to press play? Sorry, folks. Uh-oh. Nope. Let's try play. From start. I had that problem too.
I click use slideshow. Does it show there, right? Oh, there we go. No, I don't know.
Okay, yay! Perfect. Thank you.
Right. Perfect. All right. So actually, the backdrop, as you can see, is Mábuli, the place I was born, and I was actually taking this picture going 40 miles per hour. So we can go to the next slide, please. All right. So I'd like you guys to know that this is not a political seminar about anti-adoption. Though I used to be anti-adoption a long time ago, and I was quite radical. So, but I've changed my own mindset and challenged my own beliefs and everything. So it doesn't complicate my relationships with my multiple family constructs. And this is also not to change your mindsets. However, this is to provide more details about transnational adoption, or also known as inter-country adoption, and transracial adoption. The transracial adoption is when a child is adopted into another family that is not of their same racial background. And this is mostly my own adoption story. Next slide, please. So I want you guys all to know and understand that not all orphans were abandoned. And just try to, I'll elaborate a little bit more. Next slide, please. So with my adoption, as you can see, those who have watched have been able to take the time to watch all of the films. I always say that my life started at chapter 2, and many other adoptees usually say that their life starts at chapter 2, the time of their adoption, rather than the time of their birth. My case study papers were the only things that I've known about and understood previously to my adoption, where it basically claims that I was found in a plastic bag hanging on a banana tree in the upland portion of Mábuli, Tabógon, Cebu, Philippines, by a farmer by the name of Elizabeth Ochia. Next slide, please. So those who have the privilege, often at the time of birth, you're able to have a baby picture. I do not have a baby picture. However, I do have a toddler picture. And when I was placed into the Department of Social Welfare's, they call it the Reception and Studies Center for Children. And it is basically an orphanage run by the DSWD. There are many different types of orphanages. There are those that are run by the Department of Social Welfare. And then there's, which is the government. And then there are also ones that are run by various religious organizations. So one of those places that I know about is called Asilo de Milagrosa, which is located not too far from Cebu City. I know a handful of adoptees who are actually previously stayed at Asilo de Milagrosa in Cebu City. Next slide, please. So I did a lot of foreshadowing in my film, and this is one of the documents which I did not get to see until I was 18 years old, because I believed that for me to be able to see these documents, I had to be of age. I know that there are many different policies and procedures when it comes to adoption, and so when I was younger, I did the research and I thought, well, I'll ask for my adoptive mom to give me access to these documents so I can learn more about myself. So the highlighted part, James Beni, being derived from the local word BINITAY, which is actually the name of my documentary. James is my first name, and then I had a second first name, which is Beni. And Beni in Cebuano dialect means to be hanged. And so because of the state that I was found, they gave me that the name Beni for the word BINITAY, kind of like a dark foreshadowing or my origin. Next slide, please. And here's my passport picture. Next slide, please. All right. So I was in the orphanage for about 2 years, and then here we have my foster parents along with their biological children and family, Bernarda and Perfecto Torres, or I also call Bernarda Mama Nor. And I stayed with this family from 1992 to 1993. So I only stayed with them for 1 year. Next slide, please. During Holy Week of 1993, so I know Holy Week changes every single year, but because last week was Holy Week, I arrived in America and I was adopted and set foot here on Good Friday. So that's another reason why I named my film BINITAY, because of what Good Friday stands for, and also my own origin story. Next slide, please. My adoptive parents' names are James and Annette Wilson, and I was not named after my adoptive parents, but I find it kind of uncanny how it's almost like it was meant to be. My adoptive parents actually wanted to name me James, and then my dad said, oh no, let's not name him James because then it would be too confusing. And then upon opening up the case study papers and processing the adoption, they see that my name is James Beni, and so they began the process, and then here I am since 1993. I was adopted into Brownstown, Michigan, which is near the airport, or Southeast Michigan, and it's very rural. The dynamics or the demographics of that area is mostly blue collar and working class, and it had predominantly more whites and not very many Asians or any other diversity in the area. And I also went through a lot of not only bullying, but prejudices, discrimination, and microaggressions. So when I was younger, I was much more kayomangi or brown when I was younger, and I endured a lot of racism due to my skin color and phenotype. I had to go through the same endurement of people pulling their eyes back to simulate quote unquote chinky eyes, or also I was teased about my skin color, being said I looked like the color of dirt, or I looked like a monkey, or I looked like the color of poop. And these are parts of the things that I will highlight later in when I talk about trauma and these types of traumas that I internalized over time, all the way up to enrolling into Filipino school. Next slide, please. So here's my adoptive mother. I was maybe around 16 years old at that time. Next slide, please. So how I talk about or categorized my self-acceptance of identity, I talk about becoming conscious and understanding trauma, decolonization and reconciliation to be able to accept my identity of my racial upbringing in a predominantly white American family, and also trying to how I navigated what it's like to be in the school system, being picked up by my adoptive parents, and then people saying, oh, why are your parents white? I'm sure that many people who come with very diverse backgrounds can also understand a similar experience. Next slide, please. So when I talk about becoming conscious, it's the social construct of racial identity and also the ethnic identity. Oftentimes for me as an adoptee, this begins in the school system, where people ask me, when did you first find out you were adopted? Or when did you first find out that you're Asian? Or when did you first find out that you're Filipino? Do you know anything about the Philippines, or being Filipinese, quote unquote? And also enduring the type of microaggressions where becoming conscious is also overlapping with the trauma as well, and how the psychic impact I have endured throughout my life growing up too. Next slide, please. In 1992, after I finished my documentary, I was looking through some end tables at our house, and I found this newspaper clipping of the Detroit News, published in February 25th in 1992 by Lawrence Lim. And my adoptive parents never actually, they kept this newspaper clipping, but they did, I think they had forgotten about it. And I remember a previous conversation with my adoptive mother. And you have to understand, I only use these terms, adoptive, biological, or foster, to distinguish which family I am talking about. And it's as if it's more on, if everyone was present in the room, I want to give us equal respect to everyone. So my adoptive mother, she had told me, I'm like, why didn't you expose me to the Filipino community before? And one of her things were that she said that we thought you would be okay. And as you grew up, I didn't sense any type of like turmoil or anything that, or you didn't even question about your identity. So I guess those were some aspects of like having the proper dialogue between the parents and children. Next slide, please. All right, so trauma. So in the closed adoption system, if you rear someone else's child, you tell them about how they entered your clan and vary about the clan they came from. Their identity is supposed to start from the moment they became part of your family, and they are expected to live as a child without a past. And so this all begins with like, I've only known about my foster family. And as my parents, my adoptive parents would say, like, yes, you are a child, but there was no knowledge or documentation or trying to understand of what kind of family I came from. And I did not find out the real details until I went back in 2013. So my only connection with the Philippines or understanding of the Philippines began in 2007 when I first had come to the Philippine American Community Center. Anything prior to that, I only had books that were very outdated and they were very Eurocentric and painted the Philippines in a very Orientalism type of nature. Next slide, please. In this slide, we talk about to find the umbilical cord, one must first go back into the womb. So this is taken from one book known as Babaylan. And I've kind of found it interesting to find this. It states that my umbilical cord was infected, spreading a foul odor. And this talks about going to the darkness of intervals of pain and joy and denial, discovery, and reconciliation. And I found like my physical umbilical cord and almost in a way like a spiritual umbilical cord of my connection with the homeland, something that I need to find healing, something that like if I go back to the Philippines, although I've endured this trauma, what can I do for myself to be able to become whole again? Next slide, please. One definition of a psychological trauma is an experience that is sudden, unexpected, abnormal, exceeds the individual's abilities to meet its demands, or disrupts one's sense of self-identity and threatens one's psychological core. And this is what happens when a child learns he is adopted. And I've always known that I was adopted, and only because whenever my parents would introduce me to their friends or family members or like distant family members, they would always say, "This is our adopted son from the Philippines," rather than saying that he is our son. And I don't know if there's like some type of ramification or psychologically when it comes to having this introduction, but maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Just to let you know, these little quotes are from Journey of the Adopted Self, and it's I highly recommend it as a book if you want to learn more about adoption. It is not about transracial adoption, but I feel that they can provide a lot of information. Next slide, please. And here's the first time I had met my adoptive mother when she had went to the Philippines during Holy Week. This is one of the reasons why it's my Holy Week is almost like a gotcha week, quote unquote, or what I call, I don't even call it just call it my anniversary of being in America or my second birthday in a way. Next slide, please. I chose this photo because it reminds me so much of After the Morning Calm. It's the book about a bunch of Korean adoptees who provide like an anthology of their narratives and stories. And it's written by Michigan native Dr. Silke Wilkinson. And one of the excerpts talks about a Korean adoptee who always hated looking at themselves in the mirror or even looking at themselves in family photos. And this, for me, what I interpreted is that just for me, I always felt like I stuck out so much. Next slide, please. While some secrets can bring people together by giving them a sense of intimacy and sharing, secrets can be destructive if they cause shame and guilt and prevent change, render one powerless, and hamper one's sense of reality. When there are secrets in the family system, there is a conspiracy of silence. The conspiracy does not have to be agreed upon verbally, but can unconsciously communicate to members of a clan. So I didn't really clearly state it in some of my documentaries, but the real story is that I was never found in a plastic bag hanging on a banana tree. The case study was created by the DSWD. However, the person that they were speaking to was Elizabeth Ochia, her name is actually listed in the case study papers. And my biological parents are actually first cousins. There are many different types of factors and both cultural and taboos that led to me being eventually put into the orphanage and then foster care system, and then in the Philippines, and then put up for international adoption. From what I've learned so far, my biological parents had a secret relationship with each other. And then it happened again, which led to my biological stepsister as well. My biological mother went with the Department of Social Welfare and Development because they made her understand that because you only claim to have found this child, you cannot keep this child due to financial instability, not being married, and not the claim of only finding the child. So she went with the DSWD and found out the name that the DSWD decided to give me, or whatever identity I was given, which was James Beni. She then decided to beg her brother, who lived in Mandawi, Cebu, to try to adopt me back into the family. However, but she did not tell him the reasons why, because she did not want to bring shame, as it talks about, or the guilt that is also talked about in this passage. So by the time that they had enough finances to adopt me back into the family, it was too late, because I was either transferred to the foster home of the Torres family, or I was already internationally adopted. Next slide, please. So in 2013, I utilized Kickstarter, and through many people's help, I was able to document this film documentary, BINITAY, and a lot of the inspiration had come from many other Asian adoptee films. However, I found that there was a lack of Filipino adoptee films out there to help provide that narrative and representation. So I arrive in the Philippines and I find out that Elizabeth Ochia is not my finder. She is my biological mother. And she had passed away 4 months before my arrival in Cebu City, or in Cebu. Many of the locals in Mábuli, or even in Tabógon, knew my biological mother because she was quite active. She was a barangay health worker. She also sold, I forgot what it's called, bibingka. And we also have a shaman, or an albulario, in our family who was quite well known as well. So I guess that also ties to why she didn't tell very many people about her pregnancy. Next slide, please. The next step was decolonization, and this talks about my connections with the Asian American and Filipino American community. Many things I have internalized and had emotional unpacking. There was also a question of me having to see a therapist for post-adoption, which I never decided to do. Other things I had to kind of unpack was the whole nativism of go back to where you came from, which I had to endure. The whole question of where are you from? I would say Nova, no, where are you really from? And I would say I'm from Brownstown Township. And then what they really were implying that because I was a different race, a different color or whatever, that I didn't belong here. And so I developed an inferiority complex for the longest time. And I had to understand the potential dissociation of ethnic identity. I would always say, I'm Filipino, but this is what makes me different. I was adopted. And it's almost like I was saying, I'm not like them. And this is something I had to kind of unpack. I'm kind of just, we're all just uniquely ourselves. But there's also a collectivist component as well. Next slide, please. And then there comes the belonging and kinship and also community. The question of who is family and who are your friends, and and culture bearers as well. When I first went to the Philippine American Community Center, it was through first Georgiana Rose Tutay that I had learned about PACCM, and she had invited me to PECUSA, which is the Philippine American Ecumenical Church in Royal Oak. And then she invited me to Kalayaan. And then the following fall, I enrolled in classes in 2007 at the Philippine American Community Center of Michigan, Basic Filipino Language or Basic Filipino, and then Filipino Youth Initiative, which was lead facilitated by Kat Fabian, who is a University of Michigan alumni, and also was co-founded by Emily Lawson. Oh yeah, sure. All right. Next slide, please. All right. And I'll also make these this presentation available for you guys if you haven't been able to see it. So I'll send it to Emily Lawson. Next slide, please. So here's me at Filipino school. There's something that I kept thinking to myself, do I really belong here? And however, there's not a single day that I haven't missed Filipino school since 2007, both as a student and from 2007 to 2009, and from then on as a faculty member. Next slide, please. Next slide. And, this is one slide that I found in particular when I was about roughly 17, 18 years old. Between 2007 to 2011, I had started skin bleaching and whitening because I had internalized many of the traumas I endured when I was younger. And although I was part of Filipino Youth Initiative, there were many things where I would be out with my family members and I just felt so out of place, and I almost wanted to feel validated by not feeling like I wasn't out of place. I wanted to have that sense of belonging. Next slide, please. All right. All right. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Well, there's Emily Lawson. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so that's where I went to chapter 1. You can press for the next few slides, and if you see a picture, I'll just briefly tell you guys. Keep going. Keep going. All right, keep going. Keep going. All right. I put together my whole family tree one more time. This is my picture of my biological mother who my biological family had given me. Next. This is my biological aunt, my mom's older sister. When she first met me, she said that you are not Elizabeth's son. So that's the joke, because she kept saying over and over. Next slide. There's my biological stepsister. Next slide. And then it's through Lola Isang, who I found out that when I asked her for the 3 days that my biological mom had me, what was the name that she always would call me or refer to me as? And she said, Isagani. So that's how I learned what my former name or identity was. And then we can stop there. And then we can open up for Q&A.
Yay! Wonderful.
Oh, hi, Tanya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, hi, Titania. Thank you for joining us all the way from California. We have guests in the house. And Professor Wong is with us too. Wonderful. All right, folks can write your comments in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A box that's down below, so we could have the questions separate from there. All right, thank you. That was amazing. I've seen you do this presentation almost every year now for maybe the past 5 years, and every time I learn something new. So thank you for that.
Yeah, but the first few years I was crying my ass off.
You're much polished now. It's okay. Yeah. So the students in the class had to post a question for you on our Canvas course website. Oh, yeah. I'm going to ask those who may want to appear on screen or who may want to unmute through audio to please write your questions in the Q&A box. Otherwise, I'm just going to go down some of them for you. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So, and let's see. Okay. So go ahead, folks, and write type your questions in the Q&A box if you really, really want to make sure it gets asked. And then I will also go through some of the ones that are on Canvas. All right. So a lot of folks have asked, how did you decide to make these films?
Okay, so the first reason was after watching all these other film documentaries about adoption, I wanted to do something different because I started assessing there's this reoccurring theme of, well, I went back to whatever said country, and I don't feel Chinese, I don't feel Korean, I don't feel Indian, I don't feel whatever. And I found that I think it's mostly trying to find this type of connection. So I was fortunate and I was blessed to be able to been given the communities to be able to have this connection. There were not any types of Filipino adoptee films, and I wanted to have like this continual documentation because there are many adoptees out there who would probably like that representation. If you like representation in the media, if you like representation and any type of mentorship, it almost like it fulfills your whole identity of seeing yourself as that person, and also it helps answer a lot of the questions that adoptive parents have, but more on the questions that the adoptive children have while they're growing up, and also challenge the status quo, because this whole idea of abandonment, people kept saying, why would you want to go look for your biological parents? They abandoned you, they threw you away, they put you in a trash can or a plastic bag and hang you up. I'm like, that did not happen. How do you know if those, how can you have to challenge the validity of those case study papers. What basically happened is almost like a blurred line of human trafficking in a way. So, but you can't control what happens in our situation. We can only control how we react to it. So.
Okay, that brings us to a good question. I've been asking all of the speakers. You know, we've had a series of webinars this semester, and I've been asking all the question, this one question of all the speakers, and I'll ask it to you too, since you kind of brought up some issues that are relevant to today. You know, one of my mentors was Grace Lee Boggs, the late Chinese American scholar, activist, philosopher, and she often started her conversations with this question: what time is it on the clock of the world? Right? What time is it on the clock of the world? And so I just want to give you a little bit of time just to address what time it is you think on the clock of the world, or how do you relate some of these issues that you've been talking about to what's going on for Asian Americans or Filipino Americans in the world right now.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. Sometimes this reminds me of my relationship with my adoptive parents right now, or even other people's relationships with their parents, where a lot of people say, oh, they're your parents, they love you and everything. But how much will they love me to be there for your own protection? One of the biggest question was, because my adoptive dad sometimes calls it the Chinese virus. And I'm like, Dad, what do you call it the Filipino virus if it came from the Philippines? Do you understand the ramifications and latent outcomes? Do you understand that when I am out and about, that my own safety can be compensated, because just because I was adopted doesn't grant me as a person who is in America and any type of I don't know, protection. So, and one day your adoptive parents are going to be gone, and who's going to stand up for you?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We've been asking this question all semester of folks, and I think you're the first who's brought up how their parents, right, react to some of the violence and macro and micro aggressions that happen in our community, and now we see even in our families. So thank you for addressing that, and sending you big hugs and much love, and so much maturity, I think, coming from you as a good response. It is like what we've talked about a lot, you and me, about how we must pick and choose our battles, right? And I'm so proud of you for being able to do that now. Okay. There are some questions in the Q&A box, and I'm going to come back to some of the questions there from there and the Canvas site too. So folks in the audience, if you have some questions, now is the time to put it in the Q&A box. Okay, so some other questions from the students in the course on the Canvas site. One question, it's kind of similar. I'll kind of put them together. What was your family's or your friends' reactions to your first documentary?
Ooh, interesting. For my adoptive parents, I'll start with, they were all at PACCM. So the first place I wanted to have it shown was the Filipino American Community Center of Michigan. I had my previous partner there with me, and then I had all of my friends front row with me, and then my adoptive parents, and I think my adoptive sister. So I actually have two step siblings from my adoptive dad's previous marriage. But my adoptive mom was just like bawling and crying in the background because it was just so reminiscent of the time of when she had first adopted me. She thought it was a really good thing, and I believe my dad did as well. For like this coming full circle. I'm quoting Lenny Strobel right now, but coming full circle was on their part. And then for my friends, I find that it was something that they kind of grew with me. It was more like sometimes there was like this emotional roller coaster, but they would help buffer, and some of them were not Filipino American or Filipinx American, and some of them were not Asian American. And it was kind of just something, I don't understand what you're going through, but I'm here to listen.
Yes, I remember that. And that was a big step. We have adoptees in a lot of our classes at U of M, in our Asian Pacific Islander American Studies classes. And one question that's always asked is, do you feel like you have to be the person of color, BIPOC, Asian American advocate in your white family? That was one of the students' questions.
I don't think it was really a choice, actually. I think it was just something I was grown into, especially going to Filipino Youth Initiative and also having a sociology course back in high school. It was in the many different things that had happened to me that led up to 2007. 9/11 happened, and a lot of people saw that I had darker skin and a darkened complexion. And although I'm not Muslim and I'm not I'm not from any of place that is like Middle Eastern or where people even mistake those for like Sikh as well. A lot of people said that you look like a terrorist, and this was back maybe 11 years old during that time. And then after the Virginia Tech massacre, people said that, well, you look like you're, I got accused of a bomb threat back then. And so when I was, I hate, I hate talking about this, but I got accused of a bomb threat from this one kid who would just constantly bully me. And it was because I was the quote unquote white Asian American kid sitting in the back of the classroom, like this whole stereotype that was perpetuated by those in the dominant culture. And so I think advocacy of me taking that sociology class, opening my eyes, realizing that my feelings are validated, I'm not going crazy, and then going to the Filipino Youth Initiative and being able to have like this intergenerational dialogue, that these things aren't just something that happened to me and not back and during that time. It's happened to Vincent Chin. It happened to those during the Chinese gold rush, and it's something that's just a reoccurring theme, no matter how big or small. And so I think that's why advocacy is something that's been I wouldn't say chosen, but something just kind of grown into.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Another question is, I'll go to the Q&A box, and I think you could see them too. If audience members, if you have other questions, please put those in the Q&A box. Anonymous is asking, do you plan on going back to the Philippines anytime soon? And it's COVID too, so that was another question from the students as well.
Well, hopefully, not anytime soon. I'm kind of talking to my producer, and he's like, don't come home until we decide to produce Pag-uli ni Isagani. So that's one of the key things. So he said, go home in spring of 2022. I would earlier just for leisure if there weren't many things going on in the Philippines that would probably put myself in danger as who is someone who's opposed to the current government in the Philippines. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we have to be mindful of that. In addition to the human rights issues we have in America, there are serious human rights violations happening in the Philippines, and they're in a pandemic as well, right? Okay, thank you. Shrila has the question, what are some misconceptions about adoption you have faced from others as an adoptee, maybe particularly as an Asian American adoptee? So what are some misconceptions about adoption that you've faced?
I think that some adoptees are all on their different parts of their journey, of their identity, and how and what they're going through. And I do have gratitude, but it's not something that I have every single day, where every time I want to bring up a certain type of struggle, I'm just told that I should just be thankful. And like I understand that it's almost like being gaslit that, oh well, there's all these other things. I'm like, well, you have to acknowledge and understand that there are many different aspects of what is going on, and it's not okay to have things be perpetuated a certain way that whenever you're being misunderstood, well, it's like you're basically just told to shut up and just keep silent. So I think those are just, I call it drinking the Kool-Aid, but some people, I think, who are Asian American adoptees sometimes can drink the Kool-Aid and kind of get in this mindset of, yeah, I think that's all. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I get it. Yep, I understand. Sometimes you have to be more enlightened. Sometimes you are more enlightened than others. Yes, and it's a challenge. It's an everyday challenge. Okay, Aditi has questions in the Q&A box. We might have to do these rapid fire, or speed questions, meaning you because we only have a few minutes left. I'll ask you the question. You try to answer in 1 to 5 words. Okay. So first question was what was, I guess it is the same. It's the same. What was the film making process like? What are some significant decisions that went into that process in terms of what you chose to show in the telling of your story?
Okay. Difficult learning experience and accidental deletion of many Filipino community files.
Okay. Other questions. What advice would you have for other Asian American or other adoptees?
The advice that I've learned, or I would
1 to 5 words.
Okay. Always be open.
That's a good one. Always be open. And to filmmakers, back your stuff up, right? Okay. All right. And what are your future plans?
Future. I don't know. I live in the moment.
Good. Tell us about your next film, Isagani.
Meeting my biological dad. He wants a DNA test.
Okay. All right. Are you going to do it?
I will only do it if he wants.
Can you put the link to that promo trailer for your next film in the chat for us? And then is there anything else you want to tell us today?
I do not have anything to tell you guys at this moment.
You try to put the link in the chat. Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. I want to invite you and everyone to next week. We have 2 events next week. I don't know if Lisa, if you could share those flyers, share those slides. But on Monday, April 12th, we have the editors of the book Fight the Tower, Asian American Women Scholars, Resistance and Resilience. They'll be speaking at 10 a.m. on Monday, April 12th, about this collection of essays about being an Asian American woman in the academy. Oh, I don't think we could see the full screen. And then on Wednesday, April 14th, a week from today, at this same time at 1 p.m., we will have a conversation with director Grace Lee, who produced the Asian Americans PBS series, or co-produced, and also directed the film American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs. And we'll have a special guest, David Magdael, who is a film publicist well known in the Los Angeles, Hollywood area. Okay, so please everyone, let's thank Isagani, James, Beni, and Isagani Wilson. Thank you, James.